Imagine you're at a park and you're with your family. You've got young kids. They're hanging around. You guys are playing in the park, playing soccer, being on the swings, going down the slides. A beautiful sunny day. And you see three kids, 13-year-old boys, three 13-year-old boys come rolling in on their bicycles. They're swearing, they're cursing, they're spitting, they're making all sorts of problems, and they make a beeline right over to your oldest son, where they start insulting him. Then you call the police because you don't know what else to do. This is a 13-year-old who's causing all sorts of problem in the park. That's when I ended up talking to a family and was really discouraged because these are the same three kids that I've heard about over and over again all summer long. After we dealt with that situation, I went to my uncle, who is an expert in adolescence and child behavior, and asked him, what are some things that we could do? The following episode has lots of information about what we can do about kids and problems that they have and what it can help do for our communities to prevent further problems in the future. Welcome to Echo of Connections, where we discuss trauma and building resilience in emergency services. I'm Dawn Hansen. As a police dispatcher, crisis negotiator, peer support team member, and advocate for first responders, I have learned how to build resilience to the trauma of being a first responder myself. I am joined by my son and co-host, Gabe Hansen.
I am Gabe Hansen. I have no real on-the-job experience, but I have plenty of second-hand exposure and have consumed tons of true crime content. I like to know why things happen and ask questions about it.
Welcome to episode 7, where Gabe and I are joined by my uncle, Tony Biglan, who is a leading figure in the development of prevention science. He has over 30 years of research into identifying effective family, school, and community interventions to prevent the most common and costly problems of childhood and adolescence. He acknowledges the need to move social issues to social services and away from police interventions. As police agencies become more taxed with social problems, Tony has scientifically proven approaches for schools and parents. Join us as we learn about Tony's values to action and the ideas that are formulated there to help create better, more resilient communities. Please listen to the end, where you will have great ideas on what to do about traumatic events or thoughts that cause you problems. Tony Biglan brings us plenty of ideas in our episode, Improving Your Life.
Hello and welcome to the Echo of Connections podcast with your co-hosts, me, Gabe Hansen, and my mother, Dawn Hansen.
Hello, welcome.
Welcome.
We would like to welcome our special guest, I get to call him my uncle, Anthony Biglan, who is the publisher of many books, one of which I'm holding right now, Rebooting Capitalism. And he's here to talk to us about all sorts of things, but I will let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Tony Biglan. I am the uncle. I'm a pretty much retired senior scientist at Oregon Research Institute, and I am the president of Values to Action, which is a nonprofit we've created to try and help communities become more nurturing, which is an earlier book I published called The Nurture Effect. It was the behind that
the base
thinking.
Yeah. And then your process to get to where you're at with the Values to Action, how did this journey start for you? Like, where did this all begin?
Well, I suppose you could say much of this started with The Nurture Effect, which I published in 2015. I came to Eugene, Oregon in 1973. And I came there because it was a hotbed of behavioral science research, and it was a thrill. I had become a behaviorist. We could get into that if you want to, but
the B.F. Skinner groups?
A B.F. Skinner, right. And there was a hotbed of stuff that had started about 5 or 10 years earlier. All these people at the University of Oregon. And so I was just going to be there for 1 year, but one thing led to another, and I got a job and stayed, and we've been in Eugene ever since. And I watched. What happened was that the behavioral revolution that began really in the 1950s, but really took off in the 1960s, was all of these things that suddenly we say, oh, we can deal with that problem, we can deal with this problem, we can deal with that problem. And we got all this evidence coming, helping people quit smoking, helping kids to not be out of control, and helping kids in, before behaviorism, came along. People with developmental disabilities mostly lived in institutions and lived out their lives, short lives, in really difficult situations. So there were all these things that could be done. And I was fortunate enough to, to be with all of these people and to know this and to watch what developed between then and now. And so I started writing The Nurture Effect, 2012 or so. And I just wanted to describe, I was there when all of these things happened, and I never considered that I was a particularly important player in it, but I watched all this stuff develop, and I wanted to tell a story, and I wrote it as basically a memoir. It turned out that it was pretty successful with people who got it, that this was stuff that worked. And so that's a very long introduction.
No, I like it.
No, it's perfect, yeah.
And in your process of, like you were describing how things have changed, what could you give us an example of, like, before behaviorism really was introduced and then after?
Well, let's just start with schools. In schools, there have always been kids with problem behavior. And very often teachers, Johnny, sit down. No, Johnny, sit down. Well, it turns out that when a kid is sort of misbehaving and a teacher keeps correcting, it actually increases the kids, because they're getting attention, because they're getting out of having to work on something they don't know how to deal with, and so on. And so what people started to develop, and some of it started in Eugene, was research on how you could use behavioral principles to help kids, behave more appropriately. One of the very first times, because, what B.F. Skinner said was that behavior of human beings is a function of its consequences, just as it is for other animals. Well, that was a terribly, an unbelievable notion, and Skinner was much criticized for it for many years. Jerry Patterson was a psychologist in Eugene, the University of Oregon, and he and some others started to say, well, maybe this does work with humans. And so one of the first things they did was they got a referral of a kid who this was when desks were movable, and this kid would move his desk all over the place. So they put a light on the desk that was green, and whenever the light was green, that kid was earning reinforcement. And they discovered that it was like magic. It actually worked. That led to him working with families that had a kid who was aggressive and out of control. And he ended up writing a book called Living with Children. And it was basically a prescription for how you could use behavioral principles to help kids develop appropriate social behavior. That led to the development of family interventions. Some of the first ones, there's one now that's called Parent Management Training Oregon, which grew out of all of this work. And that program has been shown to significantly reduce aggressive social behavior of kids. And it turns out that when you help parents get better at that, you end up preventing antisocial behavior, substance use, academic failure, and so on. And in fact, a version of that program, the country of Norway was looking for something that would be relevant to dealing with aggressive kids. And so they looked at all the literature around the world, and they discovered this Parent Management Training Oregon. Well, it turns out Jerry Patterson is Norwegian. Oh. So they ended up taking that program to Norway, and they trained people in all 7 regions of Norway. And they actually did a randomized trial. And you should ask me why randomized trials and so on, because that's a key thing to talk about. And what they showed was that they significantly reduced aggressive behavior when they translated this into Norwegian. And actually, Jerry Patterson's wife, Marion Forgotch, was the person who really brought it there. Oh, but anyway, that's one of about at least 16 family interventions that have been developed since then that are in widespread use around the country.
And how
although
long-
we got a long way to go to reach every family that could benefit.
Oh man, yeah. And so the program in Norway, how long has that been up and going?
Well, I was honored to be asked to give a keynote address at the 10th anniversary in Oslo of that, celebrating that program. And that was probably 10 years ago.
Okay, so there's some serious data from that whole process. And in Oregon, what was the name of the program in Oregon?
Parent Management Training Oregon is what they called it.
And is it something that people could access and find out about?
Yes.
If we know of families, I can think of a few that could use some help.
Yes.
And that's something they can just like apply and get the information, or.
Yes. I chair the subcommittee on prevention for the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission for Oregon. And we have been studying what's being done in Oregon in an effort to try and improve prevention. And so one of the things I've learned is that there are about 6 of the family programs that have been developed that are in fairly widespread use in Oregon. And parent management training is one of them. But I think I got away from your question.
So if people wanted to access that, is it like an application process? Is it through a professional? Or?
Well, actually, in Lane County, the Positive Parenting Program is one that's being provided, and I think that it's
the big one.
There's one in every community.
Amway. United.
United Way.
United Way.
Yes.
Amway, United Way. You can see where I was going with that.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, United Way.
And they are funding the Positive Parenting Program, and that program is designed to reach as many families as possible. The reason I started to tell you about the work we've been doing in the state is that there's a group called the Oregon Parent Education Collaborative, OPEC.
OPEC, okay.
And that consists of about 3 foundations that have been trying to improve the availability of family interventions in every region of Oregon. And they've got a bunch of what they call hubs, which are sometimes a couple counties, and they work in each hub to try and improve the availability. Unfortunately, they said that their last estimate was that about 7% of the families that can benefit from these programs are getting them. So we got a lot more we can do.
Yeah.
Reach out.
But
Yeah.
we can significantly reduce the rates of delinquency with family and school programs that have proven benefit. And I could go on and on and on about it.
And I completely believe and have seen firsthand what it's like to not have what people need. People really have needs. And
yes, the kids you described to me the last time we talked, those kids could benefit from the family programs, and they could benefit from school programs.
Absolutely.
There are some pretty neat school programs too.
Because our school resource officers are sort of our link between the police departments and the schools for us, and they do actually try to find ways to be educational and
Right.
But it would be great to have. I think that they often feel like, I do, where there's just not enough for anybody. Trying to figure out like, okay, I have 3 sort of simplified answers that are not really getting what people need.
We had a conversation about this the other day, and you were describing kids who end up in parks bullying people,
Yes.
and they're not at the level that they're gonna be arrested for that, but they're on their way.
Nuisance, yeah.
And so I thought about that, and I thought, it's really unfair to law enforcement to give them be the only entity that's dealing with this, because that kind of thing could be dealt with through effective school programs and through effective family programs. You have a kid who's out of control and a bully and so on.
Yeah.
That can be dealt with, and it can be dealt with programs that basically teach kids good self-regulation, get along with others, and for example, there's a program called the PACS Good Behavior Game, and
Oh yeah, I was reading about that.
yes, So
In Reboot Capitalism.
yes.
Nice.
That I helped introduce that program into schools in Yamhill County. And what it consists of is a set of what we call kernels that are simple behavior influence techniques that we teach kids to begin to self-regulate and to cooperate and stuff like that. And then once you put those in, then they play the game. And the game consists of teams of generally 4 kids. And each of those teams, they're in a sense, it's a sort of soft competition. Every group can win. And so let's say you have, we're going to have 10 minutes of silent reading. So if the kids are silent reading and there's less than 3 or fewer disruptive behaviors in that 10 minutes, they get a reward. Well, what's the reward? Well, there's one of the kernels is Granny's Wacky Prizes. And Granny's Wacky Prizes is this blue bag, and in it are a whole bunch of slips of paper you can take out, and each of them is something that the kids can get to do because they were on task. And so there are things like all the kids lie on the floor face up, and the teacher goes around and makes faces and tries to get the kids to laugh. Or they have a conga line where they march through through the classroom and so on. They're mostly things that kids aren't allowed to do, but they get to do them when they have earned this reward. We introduced that in 3 elementary schools in Yamhill County, and they had as much as an 80% reduction in disruptive behavior of kids sent to the office and things of that sort.
80%.
And that was the first year, and in each of those schools, it was just some of the classrooms. By the second year, all of the teachers wanted it. And they knew teachers in other communities in Yamhill County, and they told other teachers. It's now in 6 of the 7 school districts in Yamhill County. It's in hundreds of classrooms in Oregon. It's in 50,000 classrooms worldwide.
Wow.
This is powerful stuff.
Yeah.
The Washington State Institute for Public Policy is an entity that looks at all of the programs that are available, and it evaluates them, and both in terms of whether or not they work, but also the costs and benefits of them. They estimated that for every dollar invested in the good behavior game, it returns about $64 in money saved in terms of reducing criminal justice costs, healthcare costs, special education costs, and so on. Some powerful stuff.
Can you use that in a jail?
Well, this is why I wrote a nurture effect.
Yes.
Because we've turned from figuring out what works. We're still doing work on that, but to get this stuff out there.
To push it. Because you have all this data, and I mean, the amount of information that you have at your brain tip that you can just pull out and give examples is incredible. It always has been amazing.
Yeah.
And to be able to put together, like I just described to you one day, a problematic park where we've had problems the last 3 or 4 summers, especially with COVID. And you came up with solutions like, well, this sounds like you really should be looking at,
meaningful roles.
Yeah, meaningful roles. I thought that was so incredible, the story that you...
So what does that mean exactly then?
Yeah, great example.
Well,
he helps me out with an example.
Yeah.
Dennis Embry, who is the mastermind who created the PAX Good Behavior game, and I should tell you that I have a contractual arrangement with him, so you can't believe anything I say about him and the PAX Good Behavior game.
He's got an amazing website. I just looked at his website yesterday, and Dennis Embry is wow.
I'll have to link it.
Yes, totally.
He has a way of seeing through things through the kid's eye, and it's just amazing. So he described going into one classroom, and he knew that there was this one kid who's just really out of control and so on. So he goes over to him and he says, hands him his keys and his wallet. And he says, whenever I'm doing one of these things, I lose these. Would you hold on to them for me? I mean, that's a meaningful role.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence that when you give kids meaningful roles, one role might be you're the greeter. You're a 3rd grade class, and today you're going to shake everybody's hand when they come in. There are many things that kids can do, and they take pride in doing them, and they're part of the, they're not the kids who are being told what to do. They're participating. In fact, Let me come back to one of the first kernel in the PAX Good Behavior game. Teacher has a poster. It's blank. And it says PAX and spleen. PAX is the half. And the teacher says, if this were the most wonderful classroom you could imagine being in, what would you see more of? And the teacher writes down what the kids are saying. It's not telling you what you need to do as a child. It's asking you to say what you want. What would you see more of? What would you hear more of? What would you feel more of? What would you do more of? And that becomes PAX, which stands, Dennis says it stands for peace, health, happiness, and productivity. And so they're participating and saying what they want. Then spleen. Dennis says that spleen is a made-up word, and he says you have to sort of smile when you say it. And what it is are the things we want to see less of, to hear, feel, and do less of. But in calling them spleens, he's trying to take the venom out of, that's a nasty thing, that's bad, right? And you know things are working when in a classroom when a kid says to the teacher, hey, teacher, that was a spleen. And the teacher says, yeah, that is a spleen. I need to do that less. So it's not something to get angry about. It's just something we want to do less.
We adjust our, yeah.
So now the kids want to go, it's time for the kids to go to the gym, right? So, Dawn, what would be some PAX we'd want to see on the way to the gym?
Oh, probably we want to be organized when we
I'm just thinking of like my third grade year of school.
Chaos.
Yeah, because
we would calm walking down the hallway.
That's
no
great.
talking, no jumping out of line. These are things that I was told as a kid.
Oh, those are spleens we don't want to see. Okay,
Oh,
so
okay.
these are PAX we want to see and spleens we don't want to see.
Spleens we don't want to see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what about like marching in line and chanting a song?
Well, we'll just, we're just going to do a couple of these,
okay,
right?
Just pick one.
But, okay, so now we're going to walk to the gym.
Okay.
And we'll count spleens. And if there are 3 or fewer spleens, then there'll be a reward when you get to the gym or maybe when you get back to the classroom.
Oh, wow.
This stuff works.
Absolutely.
And there's evidence that it shows that, there are like, I don't know, something like 20 transitions a day in a classroom, right?
That sounds about
Getting
right.
kids from A to B,
Which
right?
is always chaos, right?
It is.
It could take a long time sometimes.
To get it all
There was
calmed
just
down.
certain days where everyone's like just more energy than normal, and you could take like 10 minutes to try to do something that would take like 60 seconds for a normal person.
And the research shows that with the PAX Good Behavior game, that you can gain as much of an hour of instructional time in a school, in a classroom, with these techniques.
Yeah, because doing the like yelling at one kid who's causing trouble, that method would eat up so much time. Not just because the student, but the teacher. Some teachers would like lose it. Right. And start just going off on a tirade, which could take like half an hour.
Yeah.
Everybody's clocking.
And it didn't stop the behavior.
Yeah.
And in fact,
no, it wouldn't. Yeah.
Dennis likes to ask. So, let's say that the teacher gets really good at reinforcing pro-social bit that they want to see, right? And so, you ask a teacher, well, how often could you praise behavior? I mean, they're exaggerating, but they say, oh, every minute, once a minute, right? Okay. So 60 times you could praise people. How many kids are there in this class? 30. Okay. They are reinforcers too. Kid gets out of control and all the kids laugh. You're outnumbered. You've got to recruit the behavior of those kids, which is why one of the other kernels is it's tootle notes. It's the opposite of tattle. And so these kids write notes to each other, basically praising positive behavior. So you're recruiting the social reinforcement of the kids.
Tootle notes.
Yeah,
I love the vocabulary and the terminology is.
Oh yeah. Well, I used to hate. He makes up all these words and so on. But
Dennis is the wordsmith.
Yeah. Well, actually, Toodles wasn't his, but but Granny's Wacky Prizes was, and PAX Vision. Yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff, and the issue is we need to get those things more widely adopted. Let me come back to delinquency.
Yeah.
Values to action, we put together an action circle. One of the, you can join values to action at valuestoaction.org for $47. And it's so far it's a lifetime membership because we haven't decided we're going to tax anybody after that. And so we had one person join who had just completed a master's degree in behavioral kinds of things. And she had a summer where before she was going to start in a clinical doctoral program. And she always been interested in delinquency and juvenile justice. So we created an action circle of about 8 people, and we each person had a job to pick one part of this thing. And so the first thing we did was we looked at how do we deal with delinquency generally? And there are a variety of ways of doing it. And so one of the things we first found out was that there are certain ways that are iatrogenic, which means they cause problems rather than helping. And there are others that are more effective. So we pulled that literature together. Well, it turns out that more punitive practices are counterproductive.
What would be examples of that?
Well, the school to prison pipeline. Johnny, sit down. Johnny, sit down. I mean, this kid's going to we've suspended you. Well,
suspensions are terrible. Or less than suspension, expulsion.
Right.
Yes.
Like permanently removing. That's the worst thing you can do for a kid.
And what is that kid doing?
Yeah, right. Yeah, where's he going now? Because for a lot of people, the only school you got, if you get expelled, you got no other option.
That's right. And in fact, there's a lot of research that shows if you have a kid who's struggling in an academic subject, they're going to misbehave because they might get sent to the office. It allows them to escape from this task that makes them feel stupid, that frustrates them, that embarrasses them. And so a lot of misbehavior is in the service of avoiding these annoying, distressing situations. So, that escalates at points that the kid gets suspended or the kid gets expelled. They've left a situation that was really aversive to them.
Yeah, and especially it seems like I can't speak of all the kids, but many of the kids I can think of, their family and home life isn't going to be a reinforcer for better behavior if there's anybody even paying attention. It seems that there's a lot of not necessarily abuse, but neglect. Just nobody really paying attention.
But we now have the family programs that can make a difference to help the family work with the school. And if you're doing both the family and the school, we have really significant reductions in problem behavior.
I can think of 3 families right now that I'm like, could we make that happen for them?
Well, actually, we should follow up on that because I may be able to connect you and help you connect
Find the right
them
connection.
with family programs because there are family programs that are available.
Because I would really like to connect Cahoots. There's a couple of people who work for Cahoots. Hopefully we'll have them also come on. But Henry Cakebread is one of the main coordinators. Like they're a cooperative, but he's one of the people who coordinates things.
Your mother works for him.
She loves Henry Cakebread. Yes.
Hold on, his last name is what?
It's Cakebread.
Cakebread.
Yeah, it really is. And his
it's an Irish name.
Yes.
That sounds so made up.
Right, but he's a very, very wonderful coordinator. And this would be right up his alley because he and most of the people who work for Cahoots want to find better solutions, and that's what you're talking about is actual
help.
Yes. And the game idea, I keep coming back to I need to get the school resource officers because they'll know who at the school is the right level for the school district that we're in.
Well, and I come back to this idea that well, let me take you through the delinquency guide because
I think that's a good example.
Because I think it illustrates why law enforcement shouldn't be the only entity that's stuck with the results of our failures to prevent these problems from developing.
Thank you.
It therefore makes it in the interests of law enforcement to try and influence the use of these kinds of programs.
Absolutely.
And so and actually, I'm going to have an ad for your listeners, because we're looking for communities that would like assistance in reforming the juvenile justice system. And you got to pay us. I have to feed my troops and so on.
Yeah.
But we're looking for communities that would like to do this. But so come back to that.
Okay.
So first of all, stop doing things that are counterproductive. Counterproductive are punitive things. Counterproductive are aggregating kids who are engaging in deviant behavior. There's very little. I mean, those kids that are bullying in the playground, right?
Yeah.
It's not single kids.
No.
It's 2, 3 kids, right?
And the more you have, the more
that's
bold
the
they get.
famous deviant peer group. And I can tell you how those deviant peer groups develop. But
I think we've seen it.
yeah,
I think every one of us can go, how there's the one kid.
well, what happens is that one kid who is angry, aggressive, a bully, and the other kids don't like him, the teacher doesn't like him, and so on. And so by the time they get to middle school, they meet other kids who are similarly, and it's magic. Suddenly they found a friend. Some of the best research done on this is done here in Oregon, in Eugene, and in Jerry Patterson's group, and Tom DeShawn, who died sadly at an early age, one of the most prolific researchers. He was studying the development of antisocial behavior. So at some point in early adolescence, he got kids to bring a friend. These are generally at-risk kids. And he had them bring a friend into the lab and had them talk about things that guys would want to talk about, right? And what he found was that if one of them talked about deviant behavior and the other laughed, deviant talk, laughter, deviant talk, laughter. Kids that had a high rate of deviant talk, laughter had arrest rates higher 2 years later. It predicted arrest rates.
Wow.
Then, same sample of kids, several years later in late adolescence, they did the same kind of thing. And they had them, and these are all boys. It's mostly boys that are causing these problems. Don't get me started on that, because there's a lot of issues there. But so what they found was that if these kids at age like 18 were talking in demeaning ways about women, laughter, demeaning ways about women, laughter, it predicted their violence toward women 2 years later, right?
Wow.
We're watching the socialization of antisocial behavior.
And the very thing that we don't want in our families.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Man.
Right. So back to juvenile justice reform.
Yes.
So stop pulling these kids together, because that actually increases offending. What you do want to do is to use basically cognitive behavior therapy and things of that sort with individual kids, so that if you've apprehended and adjudicated a kid as a delinquent, you need to use those kinds of interventions. And there's good data on it. There are systems to do. But what we did in our guide was back off, go beyond that, because it's not just a question of what the juvenile justice system should do. No. It's a question of all the things that could be done to prevent that trail from the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, so our guide talks about all the things I've been talking about in terms of family, school, and community interventions that can prevent these things. And what we want to do is work with the community where we would actually create an action circle, where we would provide the support and help them create it. But you'd have influential people from the justice system, but you'd also have people from schools, you'd have people from community, family services, and other people. And you would educate the community about what's possible and then try and get those things going. And we have so resources need to be put to it.
Right.
But $1 gets you $64 is
back.
worth doing it.
And it's so there's just so many areas that it's one of those, okay, you'd have to focus on, like, we're just going to pick, I could see why you're like, let's pick a spot to start. And,
yes,
because there are so many places that it feels like people need help
Yes.
And that families need help.
And actually, you put your finger on another aspect of what we think is needed to help communities, and that is to help them pinpoint a specific problem that you can make a difference on, rather than just try and do everything.
Shotgun approach, because it seems like if your community comes together and says, okay, I think all of us agree this is where we're going to start, we can all put our effort towards this and see our dollar come back at 64.
And we're doing that in some communities, already doing that in a community in Oregon.
Oh yeah,
yes, it's in Yamhill County.
Back
that's
to
as far as I'll go.
Yeah,
yes.
Nice.
Well, so about 5 years ago, I was talking to people at the Ford Family Foundation, and they said that I should go talk to their community organizer in Yamhill County. So I did, and I didn't think much would come of it. I gave her a copy of the Nurture Effect. A few months later, I hear that she's created a Nurture Newburgh.
Oh, nice.
I told you what the community is. So I like this woman. Right?
Yeah. They have good trainings in Newburgh, by the way. I don't know there's something special about Newburgh, so that's my endorsement.
What do you know about Newburgh?
When there's police and call taking trainings,
yes,
lots of guest people end up in Newburgh.
Yes, I know something about that. The woman I was talking about is named Denise Bacon.
Oh yeah,
she's on the city council.
Yeah,
she's been there for 14 years. She's described the police. She's a fan of the police, and they are they're using really good techniques. When they are aware of somebody with a severe mental illness, they arrange for a police officer and a mental health person to come and just make nice with that person, get to know them, and so on, so that they lay the groundwork if that person needs assistance.
That's and that's what Cahoots for us. Usually we'll know, we try as best we can, if it's not a police issue, to not have police go.
Yeah.
Or if it kind of is, like there's that tipping point where you're not really sure, we as dispatchers end up sending both.
Yes.
And once the officers kind of go, it's all good, everything's safe, nobody's actually armed with anything, like it was said, because you never know when we have them on the phone. Sometimes people say they have knives, and then they get there and it's not an issue. So, and then Cahoots can step in, or Cahoots goes out and maybe they originally started off where everything is fine, and then they'll ask for assistance.
It goes south.
But it works pretty well as a team, because it takes a team to deal with people who have special, unique issues that come up. So I think every community has to sort of figure out what's the best way to get to talking to people. And I've wanted to ask you this is a little bit sort of a side option here. What in your life made it so that you are so drawn to this research and ideas and problem solving? And that's
I'm 78 years old. I wasn't always this way. I've learned a lot in 78 years.
Bravo! Well done.
Right. In fact, I actually started out in psychology, and I was trying to solve my own personal problems and studying psychology, and. The problems we have in society are all problems of human behavior. Mm-hmm. And this is what actually drew me to B.F. Skinner, because I actually, before I started reading Skinner, hated B.F. Skinner, because he was saying that human behavior was determined. Well, human behavior being determined, what
about free will?
So there's no free will, right? Well, you're going to determine my behavior, and I don't want that. And that's understandable. People resist being told what to do, right?
Yeah, we do.
But that wasn't what he was talking about. He was talking about the consequences that affect the consequences of behavior that affect behavior, and setting up consequences that promote this kind of behavior and not that kind of behavior, which is what the good behavior game and all these other things are doing. But that doesn't have to undermine agency or autonomy. And in fact, I think we've gotten better at respecting the individual. I mean, for example, as a clinical psychologist, I would never be my role to tell a person what they should do. My job is to listen to people and understand what their concerns are and help them to move forward in life the way they see. And I trust that if you ask any person in an uncoerced way what's important to them, they will tell you things that you would be completely comfortable about. Steve Hayes, who's the developer of acceptance and commitment therapy, is one of the most revolutionary things in clinical psychology, describes a guy who was in a group he was running, and he was carrying a gun. He was, really angry, and nobody's going to mess with me and stuff. And they did an exercise, and the exercise was about what he wanted for himself. And they, at the end of this exercise, he was crying about the things he'd done to his family and so on. Everybody wants to be loved, and everybody wants to be cared for. And when you can give them that, problems diminish. So
yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
So values to action. The game. So for the, what's it called? The PAX
Good Behavior
PAX
Game.
Good Behavior Game. Is that something that one is part of a program that would have to be? Yeah. And then if schools, like if I wanted to get the information to a school, because I have an idea of who I would send that to, then is that something that they would reach out to that process and work through that?
Yeah, the Paxis Institute in Tucson, Arizona is the company that's providing the training to teachers. They don't advertise because word of mouth is just, it keeps spreading. If you did a Google search of PAX Good Behavior Game, you'll readily get not only the Paxis Institute, but also there are a ton of videos. There's one of this little girl, and she's like in second grade, and she's just talking in such a sophisticated way about how she likes the PAX Good Behavior Game and so on. It's so cute. But there are tons of videos
That help support that.
showing it. So cool. But I was going to tell you about communities.
Yes, communities.
Because what Values to Action is doing is trying to figure out ways in which we can help communities to become more nurturing. And what I mean by nurturing is that the first, see, I was on I'm sort of wandering here, but the National Academy of Medicine has, are you familiar with the National Academy of Science and Engineering and Medicine? So if you go to Washington and you go to the, it's on the street, Constitution Avenue, I think it is.
That's one of the big
and
ones.
there's this delightful statue of Albert Einstein there. But you go into the building, and there's this huge portrait of Lincoln when he was signing the papers to create the National Academy.
Oh, wow.
And they created the National Academy to make use of science, to summarize science and provide it to the society. And so I was on a committee there in 2008, 2009, where we summarized what we know about prevention at that time. Now I've forgotten why I started to tell you that.
The community, the nurturing communities and what that means.
Right. Well, after looking at all of these programs and being on this committee, I started to think about, well, what are the key ingredients of programs that work? And that's how we came up with this notion of nurturing environments, that basically environments that work for people are ones that minimize toxic biological and social conditions. Toxic social conditions are criticism, anger, conflict, and so on. But toxic biological conditions are things like airborne lead, high levels of omega-6 in the diet, are things that harm well-being, harm health and often behavior. And so minimize toxic biological and social conditions. The second thing about nurturing environments is they richly reinforce all kinds of pro-social behavior. And I'm not talking about M&Ms and stickers. I'm talking about listening and caring and so on. There's a YouTube video that promotes the nurture effect that talks about this, and it's got pictures of your cousins, Ashlyn and Grayson, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so, and the third one is that it limits opportunities and influences for problem behavior. Opportunities like kids roaming the parks unsupervised, but also influences on problem behavior like the marketing of cigarettes, the marketing of alcohol, the marketing of unhealthful food. And so we need to limit those. And the fourth one is that it promotes psychological flexibility. And psychological flexibility is sort of what is involved in the revolution in clinical psychology that I mentioned that Steve Hayes brought about. Psychological flexibility is the ability to be in present moment contact with where you are and what you're doing, as opposed to being in your head about what happened before or what might happen in the future. To be clear about your values, to take action that's consistent with your values. And so often we don't take action that's consistent with our values because our mind is telling us that, oh, this wouldn't work, or we're upset, or we're distressed. And so we drink or take drugs or work, without stop, all in ways of avoiding feelings that we don't want to have. And so what this approach to psychological flexibility does is it helps people to be willing to have thoughts and feelings that they have avoided, but to do it from a distance, to step back from it. If I asked you to close your eyes and think about, let's do this. Okay, so
Close my eyes.
Think about something that happened to you when you were 5 years old, or, you don't have to tell me what it is, but when you got it, just let me know. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. And now think about how your body feels sitting in that chair, and just notice that. And now think about something that you're going to do tomorrow. And now think about something distressing that just happened to you in the last month. Okay. So here's the question. Who is watching all of those things?
Me.
Right. And isn't there a sense in which the you that's observing these things, the thing that happened when you were 5 years old, the thing that you're going to do tomorrow and so on, that all of those things are different from the you that's watching them? There's a sense in which you are an observer, and the observer self is different from any of those things. We've just helped you to diffuse from, not be fused with thoughts, but to see the thoughts and notice them. Diffusion is a key skill because it helps people to be able to notice these things and realize that they're the same, whether it's something that's very distressing or there's something that's very satisfying. And the acceptance is the ability to accept the thoughts and feelings that you have. And one of the reasons that it's important to become good at accepting thoughts and feelings is because you can't control those feelings. And in fact, and this is what really hooked me into this approach, because I'd worked with people in Springfield, in the clinic we had in Springfield, I had worked with people who had anxiety disorders, and we were pretty successful with them. But there were some people we just couldn't get anywhere. And what it was that their whole life was built around not feeling anxious. And
Trying not to?
Yes.
Like that was the focus?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you try to not have a thought, you're going to have that thought, right? And in fact, the saying in ACT is, if you don't want it, you've got it. If you don't want to be anxious, that's exactly what you're going to do, because life is about, And so we have to help people to step back from this stuff and accept whatever feelings that they have. And in the context in which they have those feelings, take the actions that are consistent with their values. And that has revolutionized clinical psychology
That-
and
yeah.
really helped people. I mean, it helped me when 9/11 happened. Mike was sort of like out of control about it, worrying about it. So I called Steve Hayes and said, I know he's not a clinical psychologist, but could he be in one of your workshops? And he and Jen went through, and in fact, Jen mentioned it the other day that she found it useful. So that's psychological flexibility, and that's one of the 4 things that make for nurturing environments, is promoting that psychological flexibility.
I think Georgia recommended a book, The
Happiness Trap, yes.
And I've actually been listening to it as an audiobook. And what I do is when I usually wake up at somewhere between 3 and 6 with anxiety. So I just put that book on, and between his, I don't know if he's British or Australian. Yeah, accent. And there's usually little exercises. So I keep replaying the same chapters over and over again.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the things he does talk about is, okay, where do you feel that feeling? Okay, let's just look at it. We're not trying to push it away. We're not trying to dismiss it. We're not trying to deny it. It's there.
Yeah.
And there is a certain level of accepting that feeling.
Well, the interesting thing about it is one of the fundamental orientations in this is that, we used to say, well, the people with mental disorders and they need to go to a psychologist and a psychiatrist and maybe take some pills and so on and so forth. No, human beings have thoughts and feelings, and we work to not have thoughts and feelings we don't want. We work to, that's the way humans work. And so this is an orientation to, there's a lot of stuff in it. You hear, well, your mind, thank your mind for that. Your mind gave you that. Okay. And there's not a lot of ways that you can control your mind. And if you try to control your thoughts, it's not going to work. It's going to amplify them. So
yeah. Did you ever have do you think of an experience where you've ever had a traumatic event that would, wake you up and I'm just thinking of the experiences that we often have. And if you're willing to share that, and then kind of what ACT would do for somebody who's dealing with this sort of repetitive traumatic intrusive thoughts.
Actually, I'm sort of looking at that now. Post-traumatic stress disorder is just that, and it from an evolutionary standpoint, it's understandable because if you walk by my favorite cat while he's eating, he'll look up, right? Well, Kelly Wilson, who's one of the founders of the acceptance and commitment therapy, has a slide where it's just a bunny, right? And he always makes the point that, okay, so the bunny's out in the savannah and there's some good veggies and they start eating those veggies. But if you watch a bunny eat, they'll look up. They eat a little bit, look up, eat a little bit, look up. Well, why is that? Because organisms, first of all, have to avoid danger to survive. And so every organism has been selected for processes that make it more likely that they'll survive. And the bunny that never looked up became an ex-bunny and didn't have any other bunnies, and so didn't pass on those genes. But the ones that are like this, so it's just, it's not just humans, it's every organism makes the priority to avoid these things. And traumatic events can, imprint that in a way that it's very difficult for people to put that aside. And of course, the way they often do it is they take pills, they use alcohol, but they, also get guns. There are all kinds of ways that people try and do that. And in fact, one of the people that I was actually talking to last week, because I was at a conference of people who are doing this acceptance and commitment training, Robin Walser works for the VA, and that's what they're doing is a lot of training in ACT for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So
yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what we're trying to figure out, ways to normalize that is a normal response to an abnormal event, that there's, like you said, it's wired in that we have to have this flag that's going to be like, hey, that's a problem. So if we see something similar
Right.
or smell something similar, then those flags pop up.
Yeah.
And then, so
in some ways, it's a wonderful set of realizations that have come about. But at the same time, it's also the recognition that we're all going to be dead, that the world isn't necessarily a good place. And of course, if you watch the news, it's not hard to see that. And so it's sort of, this is the way the world is, and now what are we going to make our lives about? And I have to say that, as much as I sort of enjoy the kinds of things we're talking about and working on this and so on, I'm very much a pessimist. I get up, I wake up in the morning and I get my cell phone out and I read the headlines in the Washington Post and New York Times, and it's like, And then I get up and I go upstairs, just as you're doing right here. I mean, you're moving forward and trying to make a difference. And
I just recently read an article, I think it was today, on gratitude therapy, I think is what they decided to call it, where the focus is about what am I grateful for, and to sort of turn that pessimism. Maybe it's not just pessimism, but I think some of that's realism too, of just understanding where we are in the world we're in, and how do I want to react to it? Do I want to be like, it's all over, or do I want to be part of a values to action committee that is doing something to do the best I can in my hula hoop? Like, I can't control the big hula hoop, the big world, but I can maybe just mine, which is why we started the podcast. It was just sort of, how can we help
I think
each other?
What you're doing is is PAX.
Right. And it's
I'm
great.
sorry, I don't have a Granny's Wacky Prize with me.
Dang.
You were hoping.
The whole time that we're talking about that, I'm like, that would have been very interesting to witness be implemented in my elementary school years, because I feel like it would have helped a lot for people.
So from your perspective as a youngin',
Yeah.
I know we know of a couple of kids that were, and maybe you were one of them, that had some problems sometimes in elementary school. How much
got more disruptive later?
Yeah. So how do you think that it would help the group that you were with? Because you were in a very small group.
Yeah, very small. Yeah, there was just 2 kids that like could have benefited a lot from that kind of stuff.
And how much do you think your teachers would have, and the rest of you?
Well, I think because we were such a small class, it really wouldn't have changed like too much, because it's not that hard to corral. Because at the end, my graduating class, elementary school, was 6 people, me included. So in the end, there wasn't a whole lot of corralling you would have needed for 6 people. And by the end, everyone was just sort of done. But I think earlier, like in 1st and 2nd grade, it would have been better for that school in particular.
I should tell you, did you know that we did an acceptance and commitment training program at your middle school?
At Briggs, yeah.
Yeah, because some of that stuff sort of sounded familiar.
Did it?
I don't think we called it all the same thing. Like, it was just starting or whatever. But
well,
some of that stuff was like familiar. But
it didn't work.
Oh.
This was for teachers, and it was designed to help them with their stress.
Yeah.
And actually, in your school, the teachers decided they didn't want to go forward with the program, I was just crushed.
Oh, I think because that makes sense, because there was like 2 teachers that did something like that, and I had one of them. And that, I think, was it Miss Steinbaugh? I want to say it was, or I don't remember, but
I could see that. She was very
I remember
progressive.
I had a very different experience than my friends did in different classes, and I remember being very, very like, I love that teacher.
Yeah,
because it was like she was able to get class like going and moving forward, while people would be still just distracted.
Well, we did a randomized trial. Randomized trial.
You have to tell us about this randomized trial. Why is this important?
Well, you have never had a prescription medication that wasn't evaluated in a randomized trial.
Yeah.
And typically for medications, it's a placebo-controlled, double-blind randomized trial. What do I mean by that? If you randomly assign people to get this or that, and they differ in, the ones that got this did better than the ones that got that, it's unlikely that that's because of something else. It's probably, if you randomly assign them, it's probably because of the thing that you did differently to them, right?
Yeah.
And you could be most sure of that if you randomly assign them. If you simply take the people who sign up and say, I want that program, and compare them to people who say they don't want that program, that's not a good study, because these people may have chosen it for reasons that, they were already more oriented toward these things and so on. And so the first randomized trials were done in the late 1940s, and there have been thousands of randomized trials since then. And everything that I've described to you, every program that I've described to you has been evaluated in randomized trials. This is the way we have learned about what works and doesn't work.
Because I think one of the things I could definitely say about when you speak about a topic, that you have data. And
Right.
from that data, you always have information that has come from studies and
Yes.
research, because
Right.
that seems to be like your passion, is to know the data and know that it's solid data.
Right.
And so that, I think, reinforces for me, whenever you speak, I always am like, okay, there's a lot of thought. You don't just take the headlines and then redistribute that information. If you have you ever had it, I'm sure maybe in the news, have you ever had something that's come across, like the rejection of the ACT therapy actually in the school, that made you reevaluate what the research was saying?
Well, what it did to me, and this has been a difficult thing in my, and this is happening at the end of my career. We got no effects of that intervention. We randomized, I've forgotten how many, maybe 20 middle schools to either get or not get the ACT intervention, and we got no effects whatsoever. And it was quite surprising and quite disturbing. We had already done a simpler study, not a randomized trial, but a pilot study with Georgia's early education program. And we had the whole staff do it. But we saw significant improvements in their well-being, and reductions in depression and anxiety and so on. And it was on that basis that we went ahead to do the middle school one. We got good results with the preschool, but we didn't with the middle school. I think that the reason was that we didn't help teachers deal with disruptive behavior, because the number one stressors for teachers are disruptive behavior of kids.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so we should have introduced things like cooperative learning and the good behavior game, but we didn't do that. But I was crushed, and in fact, we have yet to submit the paper that we did on that, and that is inappropriate. And so when I was at this conference last week, I realized, this is wrong, and I'm back to, submitting that for publication. You may not get it published because it didn't show positive results, but it needs to be published.
Have you had any other cases like that in your 78 years?
Well, I've probably done 15 or 20 randomized trials. And by the way, the rules for doing randomized trials have gotten stricter and stricter. And so you look at some of those early studies, and there are definite weaknesses in the way that we did the studies. But in virtually every case, we got significant benefits in reducing cigarette smoking. We did a randomized trial of community intervention where we had 16 communities, and 8 of them were randomized to just get a school-based program that we'd actually, developed earlier. But the others were randomized to be a community intervention where we actually mobilized the community to do a bunch of things to reduce youth smoking. And that was successful in reducing youth smoking. And it actually reduced marijuana and alcohol use as well. So
just sort of not on purpose, or was that?
We didn't intend it. We never specifically talked about those. I suspect that, one of the parts of the intervention was reducing access to cigarettes. That was actually a pretty neat part of it. This was in the 90s, and it's illegal to sell cigarettes to kids, but you asked the police about it, and they said, we take that into the court, and the judge is going to throw it out. What are you wasting our time with this? So we really couldn't get the law to be doing it. So what we decided we'd do was, and it was our administrative assistant. We had a meeting about this, and what are we going to do about this access thing? And she says, well, you're always talking about reinforcement. Why don't you reward the clerks for not selling? So we said, oh, okay, we'll do that.
There you go.
So we had the kids go around. We had kids underage go around to each of the stores in the community and attempt to buy. And if the clerk was willing to sell, in baseline, we just measured what they did. We didn't do anything about it, but we just kept track. And we had the proportion of stores in the community that would sell. And then we'd take one community at a time, and we'd introduce rewards for the clerk. And so what we do is a kid would go in, and if the clerk was willing to sell, we'd give them a reminder, please obey the Oregon law, don't sell to kids. If the clerk was not willing to sell, we'd give them a reward. And it was usually like a $5 gift certificate that somebody in the community had donated.
Oh, yeah.
And then we got some publicity for them. So this clerk caught in the act of obeying the Oregon law. And so we found very significant reductions in the proportion of stores that were willing to sell in 7 of the 8 communities that we did that in.
Wow.
So Dennis Embry learns about this, and he's working in Wyoming.
Okay.
And there was a law passed that required that every state systematically reduce illegal sales of tobacco to kids. And if they did that, they could keep the block grant money that they got for treatment of substance use. But that would be cut back if they didn't do this, right? So that they were motivated to do something about it. So they got a baseline, and there was a lot of stores, the majority of stores were willing to sell. So he had us come and train people to train to do this reward and reminder program. And they did it throughout Wyoming. And we've got a graph of, it like this, and it goes down like that. And it just was, really significantly fewer. It was near zero for the whole state. And later, Wisconsin had the same problem where they're going to lose their money because it was going up, and they did the same thing. So we have what's called a multiple baseline design across 2 states, showing very significant reductions in sales. But of course, Dennis, clever as he is, he added a bunch of bells and whistles. He made a video. There was what was a final answer?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they go around to the clerks and they ask him, well, what do you say if a kid comes in and so some of the clerks had some snappy answers, right? So he puts them on cards and then he distributes them to all the people, right? So then he makes a video of kids going in and being told these things, right? So now this video is on TV, and so he's informing the kids, here's what's going to happen if you go in and try. But he's also, showing teaching the clerks what they can do. And it was just like very successful.
We need some of those snappy answers for parenting and all sorts of things.
Yes, right.
Thank you for joining us on our quest on Echo of Connections. You can find our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and echoofconnections.buzzsprout.com. Join the quest to find the resilient life on Echo of Connections.